What's going on, everybody? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. This is pros and cons for the TCL 30Z. In this video, I'm going to be giving you some of my favorite and least favorite things about this phone to help you decide whether or not it's the right one for you. Now, before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more about this phone, be sure to check out my full review and tips and tricks videos for it on the channel. But with that being said, let's get started. So my first pro for the TCL 30Z is the face unlock. Now with this phone, unfortunately we don't get a fingerprint scanner, but at least it does have face unlock, giving us an extra option to get into the phone besides putting in a pin. Now if we were talking about a mid-range phone or honestly any phone above $100, face unlock probably wouldn't even be in the conversation, because at a certain price point it really becomes an expectation that a phone has not only face unlock, but also a fingerprint scanner as well. But with an entry-level phone like this, not all of them, but a good amount of them don't have either, so seeing that this phone at least has face unlock is definitely a nice thing. Now to give you an idea of how well it works, let me demonstrate. There we go, one more time. And there we go. As you can see, it's real fast and responsive, so if you're looking for an entry-level phone but you want to make sure it has at least one other convenient option to get into it besides putting in a pin, then the TCL 30Z is going to be a great choice. Now my second pro for the TCL 30Z is the display. Now with this phone, we're getting a 6.1-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 282, and an aspect ratio of 19.5 by 9. Now on paper, these specs aren't really particularly impressive. Pretty much every phone in this price range is going to be similar, but that being said, with an entry-level phone under $100, it's pretty common for the display to be super small, like under 6 inches, but with a 6.1-inch display, we're definitely getting a decent size here. Sure, it's not the largest display out there, but it's still going to be large enough to give you a good experience with content consumption. So if you're watching videos, playing games, even reading, you are going to have a decently good experience with this phone. In addition to this, for only being a 720p display, I do think the image looks decently sharp, and the colors also look really good as well. That's one thing about TCL phones. Pretty much all of them, even the really low-end ones, have really nice displays. Since after all, TCL primarily makes TVs, they put the same technology into their phones, and it really does show. And with an aspect ratio of 19.5 by 9, we're getting a decently tall and narrow form factor. Now it might not be quite as good as the 20 by 9 and 20.5 by 9 aspect ratios some other phones have, but it still is going to be pretty good. So if you're viewing videos in landscape mode, for example, for the most part, it will look pretty nice. And then if you're doing something like reading, compared to a phone like the iPhone SE, for example, that has a much wider and shorter form factor, you can fit a lot more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. So in general, while compared to something like a mid-range phone, this display is nowhere near that quality. For the entry-level phone it is, I would say it is one of the better options in this price range. My third pro for the TCL 30Z is the Next Vision features. Now if you've never had a TCL phone, you probably don't know what this is, but essentially all TCL phones have extra features that help enhance your experience when it comes to the display. So with this phone, we get features like image and video enhancement that are going to improve the details on your screen. There's several different display features that do a variety of different things, like make the display easier to see outside and better optimize it for reading. This phone even has several different color features that really help you personalize your experience. Now this is another one of those things where if we were talking about a mid-range phone, then it would be more of an expectation that the phone has this. But for such an entry-level phone, remember this phone is under $100, and for a phone in this price range, it's actually pretty uncommon for them to have these features. So in general, if you are in the market for a really entry-level phone, but you also want to make sure you have the best display you can get for the money, then the TCL 30Z is really not a bad option. Now my fourth pro for the TCL 30Z is the software. With this phone, we are getting Android 12, and while it's not really uncommon for a phone in this price range to have the latest version of Android, there are plenty of them, and I'm talking phones that are made in 2022 that have much older versions. Lots of them have Android 11, or even worse, Android 10. And while those softwares aren't really bad by any means, usually they're decently optimized so they run pretty smoothly. If you're someone who really wants the latest version of Android, but you're still really looking for a more budget option, then a phone like this with the latest version of Android is definitely going to be your best bet. Now that being said, keep in mind that seeing that this is a Cricket branded phone that's under $100, I wouldn't expect to get any major software updates, and seeing that Android 13 is right around the corner, if you're concerned with getting the latest versions of Android as they come out, in that case I would go for a slightly higher end device that's going to get more updates, most likely a Samsung. But if you're not really concerned about updates and just want the latest current version of Android, then I would say for what it is, the TCL 30Z will be a pretty good option. And my fifth pro for the TCL 30Z is the headphone jack. Now on one hand, pretty much every phone in this price range has a headphone jack, but that being said, more and more manufacturers these days are doing away with their headphone jacks, even in the more budget phones, like for example, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G and the A33 5G don't have headphone jacks, and while those phones are not nearly as low end as this phone, we can really see the trend going in that direction. So seeing where things are going, it's really just a matter of time before even the lower end phones start to lose their headphone jacks as well. So seeing that the TCL 30Z does in fact have a 3.5mm headphone jack, it is really a nice thing because even if you do use Bluetooth headphones, it's always good to have options. I mean, not only just headphones, but what if you have an aux cord or something like that? There are plenty of uses for a 3.5mm headphone jack, and it is too bad that more and more phones are starting to lose theirs. So if you do like the old-fashioned wired headphones, just know that with the TCL 30Z, you can use those no problem. But now that we've gone over some of the good things about this phone, let's talk about some of the drawbacks. So my first con for the TCL 30Z is the materials. Now on one hand, this phone does have decent build quality for what it is. It doesn't exactly feel like it's gonna fall apart, but at the same time, it is made entirely of plastic. And this is not just any plastic, this feels like really cheap plastic. And especially considering this phone has a removable back, it does feel pretty flimsy. There's pretty much no weight to it whatsoever. Now on one hand, when you're getting a phone in this price range, I know you really can't expect that high of quality, but at the same time, even if you just want something solid that feels like decent quality, I still think in that regard you can do better than this phone. Now my second con for the TCL 30Z is the micro USB. Now unfortunately with this phone, on the bottom here, we got a micro USB port instead of USB-C, and in this day and age, especially in the US, micro USB for Android phones at least is pretty much the industry standard. So if you have any accessories or anything like that, sure, you probably can find a cord that's compatible with micro USB, but it's going to be a lot harder and more annoying, and in general, compared to micro USB, USB-C is just faster and better quality. And unfortunately, with phones in this price range, micro USB is quite a bit more common, so when you're looking for a more entry-level phone, this is something to keep in mind. My third con for the TCL 30Z is the storage. With this phone, we're getting 32GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and today in 2022, I really feel like 32GB isn't enough for any phone, even an entry-level phone like this. To give you an idea of what this kind of storage looks like when it's actually being used, right now, as you can see here, I have 8.39GB free using 74%. So let's take a look at how exactly this works. So as you can see here, I'm using 24GB out of the 32 total, and if we take a look at what's actually taking up this space, as you can see here, most of it is actually in the system, taking up 13GB. Now this is a huge drawback because obviously you can't get rid of the system, you need that for the phone to function, so really you don't even get a full 32GB. Since the system takes up 13, you really only get 19GB to do what you want with, and even then, I don't really have a whole lot on this phone. I have some basic apps that people usually use regularly, stuff like social media, streaming platforms, and a few games, but nothing really crazy. And I have literally 2 pictures on this entire phone, and as you can see, pretty much all of my storage is used up. And again, what I have on this phone really isn't that much. So if you're a power user, for example, and you have a lot of apps, or maybe you have a lot of photos and videos, or even if you're just using your phone for normal purposes, stuff like text data, cookies from web browsing, all that kind of stuff is really going to add up. So again, for the average user in 2022, 32GB of internal storage just really isn't going to cut it. Now, one bright side to this is we do get microSD card expansion. So if you want to offload stuff like photos and videos and music and that sort of thing, you can. But that being said, it is nicer to have more internal storage on the phone itself, and not only that, but there's some stuff you just can't offload onto a microSD card, so having a microSD card really only solves part of the problem. So overall, unless you're a really light user, then the storage on this phone is definitely going to be a huge drawback. My fourth con for the TCL 30Z is the camera. Now with this phone, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera, and this camera is 5 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a single camera here, and this camera is 8 megapixels. So as far as features go, this phone has pretty much nothing, just one main camera, the front facing camera, no ultra wide camera, no macro camera, not even a depth sensor, although portrait mode does surprisingly work. So if you're taking a lot of photos and you want a wider variety of features, then this is not going to be the phone for you. And even if you really just use the main camera, the quality on here is pretty disappointing. Now, I understand this is a really low-end phone and you really get what you pay for. You're obviously not going to get anything near flagship or even mid-range phone quality with this camera, nor should you even expect it, but at the same time, the photos taken with this phone, in my opinion, aren't even usable for anything. Even if you just want to take pictures for Instagram, for example, I honestly wouldn't even trust this phone to do that. Now, here's a photo taken with the main camera. I'm really going to let this quality speak for itself. If it does look acceptable to you, then maybe the camera on this phone might not be such such a big deal to you, but in general, I honestly wouldn't use this photo for social media or anything, maybe for something like Snapchat where the quality really doesn't matter. But in general, if you want to take photos you're actually going to keep, then even in this general price range, you can definitely do better. And if you are taking a lot of photos, unless you're getting this phone for absolutely free, you can actually spend just a tiny bit more and get so many more features and much better quality as well. And for that matter, you can probably even get a free phone that has a better camera setup. So overall, if you're taking lots of photos that you actually want to keep for something, I would definitely avoid this phone and get one that can take better pictures. Now my fifth and final con for the TCL 30Z is there's no fingerprint scanner. Now we kind of talked about this a little earlier in the video, but I wanted to go over it again because it honestly is such a disappointment that this phone doesn't have a fingerprint scanner, because today in 2022, I feel like every phone should have that feature, and since this phone already has Face Unlock, it really wouldn't be that hard to give it a fingerprint scanner too. But then again, like I said before, there are plenty of phones in this price range that don't even have Face Unlock, and in that case, you're stuck putting in a PIN or a password, so at least this phone has one other option to get into it. But again, all the same, since most people like fingerprint scanners better than Face Unlock anyway, it would have been nice if this phone had a fingerprint scanner instead. But those were my pros and cons for the TCL 30Z. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you found this information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. And again, if you want to learn more about this phone, be sure to check out my full review and tips and tricks videos for it on the channel. But that's it for this video. As always, I will see you in the next one.